And though smoking, alcohol, tobacco, and sexually transmitted diseases are also very detrimental to these impoverished sectors of India, this remains nominal compared to the lack of food and water that is in these impoverished sectors. So why is food so important? The carbohydrates in water are the main components that fuel basic biochemical processes such as cellular respiration and biosynthesis. These reactions are dependent on biological catalysts called enzymes. And without these proteins, humans lack the building blocks to make proteins and therefore cannot carry out these vital life processes. So on to the solutions. One of the solutions that we've come up with 3 solutions, and one is depending on whether or not Prime Minister Narendra Modi will implement his promises. He will have he has promised to benefit the Indian population by conducting greater efforts to improve the sanitation situation in India.
Thank you. Angie, how did your group handle the differing perspectives to come to a conclusion?
So throughout the process of researching, we realized that some lenses were more important or had a greater effect on the overall paper than others. So for example, in the presentation we stressed a lot of the science behind why food is so important to the human body, as well as the situation with India, and with the economic perspective. And so although we originally did our individual papers with 2 lenses each, our team paper was kind of a synthesis of the most important parts of our paper, which just happened to be economic and, I guess, scientific and historical for this paper.
Thank you.
This is an equation that former corporate scientist for Frito-Lay, Robert Isan Lim, revealed in a public interview. The amount of sugar it takes to make a child addicted is what corporation-hired scientists call the bliss point. Making children addicted to these sugary products is a calculation. A study by Professor Bart Hobel and his team in the Department of Psychology and the Princeton Neuroscience Institute proved that rats can become dependent on sugar under certain circumstances, and thus make them more susceptible to metabolic diseases, which we believe translates into human conditions such as obesity. This experiment included several rats that were placed in a cage with sugar and cocaine. 94% of these tested rats preferred sugar, and of the rats who preferred sugar, many displayed symptoms of addiction, including withdrawal, binging, craving, and cross-sensitization. 20 years ago, 1 in 20 children in the US were classified as obese. But today, this statistic has elevated to 1 in 5. The World Health Organization recommends about 12 grams of sugar on a daily basis for the average American, and the American Heart Association recommends even less. However, because of the added sugar in products, Americans are far exceeding this recommended intake. Our second solution pertains to education. In countries such as France and Japan, it is evident that governments put public health over corporate profit because they subsidize school lunch programs rather than oppose them. In Japan specifically, there's a heavy emphasis on what we call shokuiku, which is the general education of health and well-being. With a budget, public schools are even able to hire nutritionists to educate the children once a week about how to lead a healthier life. The result is something like this. These children serve food for their peers and themselves while learning about how these foods are healthy for their bodies. If and when our recommended solutions are implemented, we can ensure that we would be taking the first steps needed in order to provide a healthier future for the American children.
You guys had a lot of research in your team paper. What did you choose to leave out today, and why did you decide to leave that out?
Does it have to be like our part of our research or our solutions?
It could be on anything that you guys wrote in your team paper.
We cut out a lot of stuff, but our one of our solutions was to modify the nutrition fact panels, and actually the FDA had approved a new panel that should be implemented by 2017, but there were some aspects of the nutrition facts that we thought could be further improved, and we decided to leave that out it was sort of a time issue.
Okay, great, thank you.
According to the Alzheimer's Association, about 135.5 million people worldwide will have Alzheimer's disease by 2050. My goal today is to make you want to push for Alzheimer's disease research at the forefront of the public health agenda. For the last few weeks, I have researched how certain factors delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease, chiefly that of bilingualism. I've been interested in medicine and healthcare for a while, and I also speak both Japanese and English. So when I read Chris Berub's article, Mapping the Bilingual Brain, I was immediately interested in further investigating the topic on bilingualism's effect on the delay in the onset of Alzheimer's disease. So after I give a brief and basic introduction of how Alzheimer's disease works a little bit, and give you a taste of how bilingualism affects the executive control system and cognitive reserve in our brains, I'd like to follow up with an analysis of what several distinguished researchers believe. So if you were asked what the single most influential causation of Alzheimer's disease is, you would most likely find that it is because of the beta amyloid 42 peptide, which according to Henry Querfurth from his article in the New England Journal of Medicine, this is just a long protein chain that is toxic to cells. The accumulation of these peptides, coupled with neurofibrillary tangles, causes the loss of calcium regulation, mitochondrial malfunction, oxidative stress, glucose intolerance, and the overall inability to maintain homeostasis any longer. The biggest implication of Alzheimer's disease, as we know it so far, is that, relatively speaking, we don't know a lot about it other than this. Scientists have found that there is something called a greater cognitive reserve in bilinguals. Cognitive reserve is the brain's ability to fight against pathological changes that come along with aging. This reserve shields against brain damage for a longer period of time. Professor Yaakov Stern, Director of Neuropsychology at the Taub Institute for Research in Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons, makes a point that cognitive reserve will come in the form of neural reserve and neural compensation. This means that your brain can be shielded from cognitive degeneration with either a pre-existing brain network that is more efficient with a greater capacity to combat disruption, or rewired with an alternate network that may compensate for the disruption of a pre-existing network. But a team of researchers led by Suvarna Aladi used statistical analysis after cognitive examinations following patients throughout 4 to 5 years. The group found that this delayed onset was present in bilinguals regardless of whether they were illiterate, of immigrant status, or had any sort of formal education. Another study points to different factors that could influence the delayed onset as well. The Gerontological Society of America would have you believe that, in addition to bilingualism, sociodemographic, emotional health, and pre-existing medical conditions are also factors that should be taken into account in their study with older Mexican American bilinguals. Emotional health was claimed to influence dementia, as married respondents were less likely to decline. Certain medical conditions may also interfere with the delay as well, as hypertension, vision and hearing impairments, strokes, and diabetes has been proven too.
Okay, so your first question is about your sources. How did you go about selecting your sources? What strategies did you use to gather your information?
So throughout the research process, or even before then, when I mentioned Chris Berub's article, Mapping the Bilingual Brain, that I used for my stimulus material, I knew that I was interested in the topic, but I didn't have a foundation, and I didn't know what the mechanisms of how Alzheimer's disease works in the human brain. So I had to go to the New England Journal of Medicine, and I found Henry Querfurth's document on kind of the mechanisms of how it works. So after going through the process of trying to discover a little bit about the plaques and tangles that influence Alzheimer's disease in the human brain, then I could go on to research what some of the professors and researchers have said about the effect that bilingualism has on Alzheimer's disease. So that was kind of the flow of my research process. But what I found is that all of these journals that I looked at were highly credible, with doctors and researchers who were very specialized in their field. However, I did find some of the methods that they used in terms of cognitive examinations to be more compelling than others. For example, when the mini mental state examination tests, or the Addenbrooke cognitive examination revised tests were used, I found those sources to be more credible than the studies that had not justified their claims using these tests.
Explain the level of certainty you have about your conclusion.
So what I have basically done throughout this process is I've taken what researchers believe to be true about Alzheimer's disease and the effect that bilingualism has on the delay in the onset. And many of the researchers agree that it's about 4 to 5 years, and that's set. However, one of the biggest implications of this entire process is that all of the previous studies that I've read and looked at all come to the same conclusion, that there are too many symptoms of Alzheimer's disease that can't be distinguished between the protective, reactionary, and pathological symptoms that go on in the brain with an Alzheimer's disease patient. In addition to patients with mixed dementia, so you could have Alzheimer's disease patients with vascular dementia or Lewy body dementia as well, and this kind of muddles the entire process of finding the root of the disease and eventually the cure.